Hello, everyone. Welcome to Love and Philosophy. This is Andrea, and this is an episode from the archive. We are starting the new season on March 17th with Janet Levin, and she is in California, a philosophy professor, author of Metaphysics of Mind, and she's written a lot of really great papers. She was part of the beginnings of analytic philosophy in a way at MIT and Harvard around those years when Fodor was developing his language of thought and Quine was teaching. I think she was even Ed Block's first PhD student, so it's a really great conversation. I can't wait to share it with you. Today we're replaying a conversation with Perry Zurn, Provost Associate Professor of Philosophy at American University, and the author with Danny Bassett of Curious Minds, which is the book we discuss here. Perry and Danny are twins. This one is from 2 years ago, one of the first ones. We've been playing some of the first episodes that we had, and this one is about curiosity. We talk about paths a lot here and how they don't exist till someone walks them. They come into being through walking, through the body, sensing what's there, reaching towards what isn't there yet, making way. And this is what curiosity does or is. So it's really interesting to listen back to this episode and hear how many themes resonate already in this early episode. The multiple paths, the waymaking, the walking, the, of course, beyond either or, multiplicity, even the third entity in dancing, edges, ecological landscapes, the planetary, more than human. All these themes are already here in a lot of wonderful ways. One interesting idea here is that curiosity isn't something you have, but it's something you do. It's a movement. It's a kind of practice, kind of edge work, as we talk about here, towards what you may sense but don't know yet. And we do it at many different scales, individuals, groups, who knows where else this is happening. But philosopher Perry Zurn has spent a lot of years thinking about this. I've been revisiting Perry's work a bit regarding ambiguity lately for another text I'm writing for something else. So this was really fun to listen back to and to think about curiosity and how knowledge comes to be. This idea of walking through landscapes and the different topographies that we talk about, the many ways that curiosity can be your companion, Perry says. You do your best work when you have others with you doing this, and the cracks that often come, the edges that break and reform, but also this notion of the mountain always having many paths that comes up in a lot of other episodes as well, how we're exploring this multi-dimensional landscape and there's always many paths to explore it. The way love or care could be considered differently in terms of how it's actually constitutive of a lot of that movement, and especially when we think about love of knowledge and if we think of knowledge as bodily. So there's all kinds of wonderful resonances here, and I just am really happy to share this with you again. Curiosity, edge work. Curiosity is the capacity to connect, not about capturing, but about living this dance together, trying to find different perspectives, learn from one another, learn from ourselves. Curious Minds is really wonderful. Yeah, so here we go from the archive. Curiosity, cracking, edge work, paths, walking. I'm really glad you're here, and we'll be back soon with a new episode. If you would like to support this podcast, please just go to the giving page and give whatever amount feels good for you, and only if you can, only if you want to. We really appreciate it. It also helps if you sign up for the newsletter somewhere or other, or really anything to help support us is just wonderful and very, very, very much appreciated. All right, be well. Hey, Perry, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So this is a podcast about exploring the love and how love informs the ways that we know and the ways that we move. And I wonder, in all your work on curiosity studies and developing it, and in your recent book, Curious Minds, with your twin Danny, if you've thought much about this word. There is a point where you say that when you were getting ready to write the book, you were thinking about what do we love as humans? And so I wonder, have you thought much about these two words in connection?
You know, I haven't thought a whole lot about it. As you ask it, I'm reminded that in early Latin work on curiosity was connected to desire and lust and love, and it was particularly located in that kind of nexus of affects. And I think today we talk a little bit about curiosity, when things we're super curious about, as also things we really love to know and think about. So it seems like there is an implicit connection with them. I haven't really spent a whole lot of time sussing it out, but one of the things I might say is in my earlier book, Curiosity and Power, I said that curiosity really needs companions to be its best self. And I think love might be a companion for curiosity that would help it be its best self. So I think we can get into trouble with our curiosity. I think we can exercise curiosity that is more appropriative or objectifying, but love, like real love, real relational affection and connection would help guide curiosity again to develop forms of knowledge and inquiry and experimentation that respect the relationship in which it sits.
What about the idea of the love of wisdom, or the the love that motivates you to be curious or to pursue a subject? Have you thought much about that? And also, I'm wondering about your own path and what sort of led you to the work that you're doing, because I think it was 7 or 8 years of research that went into the book that you did, and you've written many, many papers, and you're more or less developing a new field of curiosity study. So I wonder what motivated that, and if there's any relation to this love of wisdom or desire for knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, there must be in some way, right? I love that you're pulling on the love of wisdom, right? Which is the translation of the word philosophy itself. And I do think that I did fall in love with philosophy in my first, really in high school, and then in one of my first college classes. And one of the things, I think the primary thing I loved about philosophy was how uh, kind of rascally curious it was, and its willingness to ask questions in areas that can tend to be kind of put off by other fields or other value commitments. And philosophy says, why not? Let's ask about it. Let's really look into it. And that insistent inquiry was in fact one of the things that made me love the love of wisdom or philosophy. Uh, and yeah, so I went into philosophy for those reasons. It opened up my world in all kinds of ways. I think I had grown up in a really restricted intellectual environment where I wasn't encouraged to ask a whole lot of questions about certain things, and I needed more room, and philosophy gave me more room. And then my twin Danny, they were similarly sort of reaching out for new spaces to be and to explore, and they went into physics. And we went, we did our undergraduate degrees, and then we did our graduate degrees, and then um, we are twins, and so this was an important moment in which we distinguished ourselves and our identities and our loves and our passions as distinct. Well, I'm into philosophy and you're into physics, and so that makes us different. But then it turned out, that we were actually trying to understand some of the same things. So Danny was studying learning and neural flexibility, and I was writing a dissertation on curiosity and a book on curiosity before our work together. And we thought, there's really a resonance here. And what would it mean to bring our very different fields together around the same and similar question? So that's really what gave rise to Curious Minds.
In this book, you redefine curiosity in a way, don't you, from the traditional historical notion of it. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about that, this idea of curiosity as connection, or not as acquisitional, but as more like a capacity or a practice. I think you use that word a lot, practice.
Yeah. Yeah. So I am really interested in thinking about curiosity as a practice. It has been conceptualized primarily as a desire or a motivation or an interest to know new information or to fill information gaps. So motivation to fill information gaps is really the way in which it's described in psychology. And then a desire to know is more of the older, more ancient philosophical perspective. But these desires and these motivations tend to be really located in an individual human. And I wanted to think about curiosity socially. So I'm a political philosopher by training. I think that most things can't be understood just from the individual level. And so I really wanted to think about curiosity at the social level. And to do that, I needed to think about it as a practice, something that we do um, to and with and next to one another. So curiosity as a practice, but then a practice of what exactly? And again, historically, curiosity has been thought of as this uh, need to sort of grasp new information, to go out, get the new piece of information and kind of own it and use it in whatever way we want to do. But I thought that misses something about what curiosity is actually up to, because curiosity really, just independent pieces of information don't help you do a whole lot, right? And aren't particularly meaningful. The reason that we're curious about something is because it's connected to what we already know, or what we're already invested in, or to people we care about, or to communities we care about, or to the earth we care about. And so in that sense, I thought, and working with Danny, I was thinking about curiosity as relational, and then I was working with Danny, and we were thinking about curiosity as networked, or as a drive for network knowledge building. And it's between those two positionalities, curiosity is relational and curiosity as network, that we came to this conceptualization of curiosity as a capacity to connect. So then you can get that social and relational resonance, but you can also get that network science resonance.
Yeah, I really love that. And I love how you did this grasping or getting or acquiring motion in terms of the way we often think about curiosity, or the way we need to get information, have information. And that's very different from the book, and the way that you both in your different chapters write about it as an exploration, as a movement. It's always like a walk, which we'll get to, but it's a very different kind of bodily presence with others and with the world in a way. And just to kind of unpack that a little bit, you also think about curiosity as edge work. I'd like to hear you talk about if it's the same thing for you, or what this word really means. And I also wonder, just kind of as a side note, in my own work or history, this idea of edge work has come as a connected to risk from the writer Hunter S. Thompson. You probably know about that. Him talking about the edge is the place that you only know if you go over it, and he actually uses this word edge work. And then I think Stephen Ling kind of picks it up in the 80s or 90s in psychology, and talks about it as people who take great risks that are almost not rational towards pursuing the edge. So I just wonder if you've thought about that side of it at all, or yeah, how this connects to the curiosity for you.
Yeah, so we do explore curiosity as edge work in the book, and that's a way to try to put feet to this concept of curiosity as connectional. So if curiosity is this capacity to build and to make connections, and those connections might be old, but those connections might be near. But if curiosity is this capacity to make connections, one way to talk about that is as building edges between nodes, or as edge work. Uh, and so that term really helps bring out some resonances in network science, but it also helps bring out resonances in kind of aesthetic theory and ecology, which is where I ran across the term. Um, in kind of aesthetic or ecological perspectives, edgework is this trying to build and live and create in liminal spaces, or to exist and survive in liminal spaces. And there's all kinds of liminal ecologies and liminal aesthetic kind of spaces. And so that's where this word edgework was sitting for me anyway. Um, and is there a risk involved? Sure. Sure. I think there must be, insofar as the edge, an edge would be, at least in network science, right? The edge would be something that's connecting or relating two different pieces. So the edge itself, at least from a network perspective, doesn't have to be the edge of the world, or the edge of a thought, or the furthest point that one could reach. And yet curiosity does seem to be, in its edge work, or its edge laying capacity, to be trying to reach these places that are on our periphery, right? Because it's part of this attempt to build knowledge out from where it is, or in from where it is. Um, and that does create certainly certain risks, especially for the knowledge network as it stands already. So if we're building edges out and in um, the existing knowledge network, the network itself and the shape and the hubs and the emphases of it and the flows of it will necessarily, hopefully, change and have some kind of flexibility. So I like that resonance. I don't know this particular work that you're citing by Thompson and Ling, but I'm excited to go down that rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
it's a different idea of it, but it's the same word. So that's interesting. And for me, it was very strange to see the edge work as the way you used it, and to kind of realize, oh, I'd never thought of that before, being so interested in complexity science and nodes and edges. And somehow it was definitely a beautiful moment to think of edge work in that way. But I'm still trying to figure out too, how it seems so rich, right? Because it depends on what position from which you're moving, what would the edges would be in both of these takes of edge work. And also that position would or would not be taking more risk depending on how you might look at it from another position, if we think of it socially or whatnot. Which makes me think of sort of pioneers or people who really set out to explore places or even force other people to recognize places that they've been or have been living in that haven't been seen before. Do you think curiosity plays a role in that, in this sense of pioneering politically, socially, also in terms of just the science that we're doing?
I think it does, and I think it can. I would say that pioneering and discovery and innovation, these things for me, these things are double-edged swords. Um,
Even the very word pioneer is kind of
right, there's
mm,
several layers there, and so I think that it's helpful to think about curiosity in relationship to those terms because I think it draws out the um complexity of the word curiosity itself. So curiosity, yeah, it can push us into new intellectual spaces, and those intellectual spaces can be more liberatory in some cases and can provide knowledge that really improves our ability to be decent humans to one another and decent humans to the planet. But that curiosity can also do the opposite, right? It can give us tools to be more extractive of the earth, to let's say building more hierarchies and kind of inequities between humans. So I think curiosity does push us in these ways toward pioneering discoveries and innovations. But again, it needs companions to do its best work. It needs to be kind of in community with other things like love, where I talk about ambiguity and opacity and kind of ways in which we don't always have to know everything or use the knowledge in all the ways that we can. Sometimes we need to respect the things that we're trying to come to know and let them exist in the way that they already exist rather than changing and using.
I love that. I love the idea of the companion instead of it's too simple to just say curiosity is good always or bad always. Um, yeah, so that really offers something to help us understand where the values matter and when curiosity can be harmful or helpful. I do want to ask you about complexity and when this idea of complexity science came into your world, or I guess with Danny and their work, it's definitely more. I mean, it's very much a part of that neuroscience, and I wonder if it was already part of your work before they brought it into your world writing this book, or yeah, what when did you first sort of encounter complexity science in the way that you're using it with edges and nodes and so on?
Yeah, so there's some network theory that really predates network science and was more commonly developed in sociology and in some social philosophies in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And so I was already familiar with some of that work. Um, and then, of course, working closely with Danny, I became more aware of network science and the way in which complexity is used specifically in context. What's really helpful for this book, for Curious Minds, um, was to think about the brain and the ways in which, if you look at really early, like phrenology illustrations, people were locating curiosity or wonder or attention in one specific area of the brain and saying that's the thing that's the place that lights up. And in fact, that we continue to get this question: what's the part of the brain that's responsible for curiosity?
Hmm.
The the development of complex systems and network neuroscience has really shown us that the brain works in concert with it, all of the parts in some way. And really the question is, what are the pathways and what are the conversations within it that allow something like curiosity to manifest itself in the world? And that has opened up, I mean, on the one hand, that becomes frustrating then. Well, what is curiosity and what is the neural basis of curiosity? And how do we, if it's not one part, then how can we really say, oh, this is the neural basis? Right now we know that there are multiple systems involved. Um, But at the same time, it helps us to to see emphases, right? The attentional emphases, for example, or the hippocampal entorhinal system and its capacity to allow us to navigate social spaces and geographical spaces, but also conceptual spaces. So we can start to pull out, as we attend and attune to those various systems in the brain that are activated in curiosity, we can start to see elements of curiosity we may not have attended to. They might have all been lumped together in a not very precise definition of curiosity, but we can start pulling those pieces apart and analyzing them separately. The more we can appreciate that there are multiple systems in place, not only neurological systems, um, but also social systems. So complexity science, of course, can help us understand social systems as well. If the more we can understand the multiple systems involved in uh, inquiry, in the practice of inquiry, in our individual minds and in our shared worlds, the more curiosity can come alive, and we can see it as a practice of many gradations, right? So that it's not just like you're curious or you're not curious, but rather how are you curious, and maybe you manifest it in this way, or you direct it this way, or you practice it this way. And this can change how we use curiosity in our just everyday kind of attempts to discover or to improve workplaces. But it can also change how we structure educational spaces.
That's wonderful. I think, yeah, opening the space, and it's not either or, you're curious or you're not. It's more of how are you curious in the world? In the book, you discuss different styles of curiosity and also different ways of walking. And I'd like to sort of talk about both of those and maybe how they are or might be connected. But first, maybe just the styles of being curious, the busybody and the hunter and the dancer. Maybe you could just give us a little brief recap of those different ways of
Yeah,
being.
sure. So I think typically curiosity, and I work in higher education, and so I see this kind of every day, but most people think about curiosity in very similar ways, as being evident in another human being if that human being asks a lot of questions, is pretty verbal, pretty interactive, maintains close eye contact, is often raising their hand or trying to like unmake something or remake something. There's just a lot of active engagement that's very evident to an onlooker. That's typically how curiosity has been perceived. But that loses all kinds of depth, I think, to curiosity and diversity to curious practices. So the styles, the busybody and the hunter and the dancer, help us zoom in and say, okay, actually, there's different ways of being curious and that are really quantifiably different. And so the busybody is somebody who's interested in sort of all kinds of things and tends not to settle down, but creates these really loose knowledge networks, right? They welcome many different pieces of information to kind of sit in their brain together. Whereas the hunter is someone who's much more focused and tends to want to know everything about a small subset of things. So they're far more likely to create really tight knowledge networks and really try to fill in all the holes between those, et cetera, et cetera. And then the dancer is someone who's really creative when they're curious. So they don't just want to know pass down information, but as they're investigating and as they're experimenting, they want to be creating. So they tend to put information together that didn't belong together from disparate areas of intellectual space and say, what happens if we put these in the same room? What happens if we make them talk to each other? What happens if I create? Um, through my curiosity. And these styles are styles I developed by looking at thousands of years of history of Western intellectual thought uh, when folks have described curious behavior. Because again, I'm really interested in curious behavior and curious practice. What does it look like when we're doing? And these seem to be three styles or types that were really common historically. And it turns out, working with Danny, we were able to establish that these are also alive and well today.
It really resonates, and it's helpful. As you say, no one is only one of these at all times in their life or even in the same day necessarily. And you also point out there are many other ways of being curious, and you even offer a sort of bestiary, which is really great, in the appendix of various other ways of thinking about this. So there are many ways to think about it, and you definitely make that clear. But I do think it's also helpful to give a little bit of structure and to show how these ways are different so that we can become more aware of them. So it opens the space of what's curious and how that might be manifesting in the people around us. It speaks to what you were talking about with complexity science of how now you don't have to look at it as either or one or the other, but there's many different ways of thinking about this nested and multidimensional system of nodes and edges and the different places from which they connect. I wonder in your work if you found sort of shapes or topographies that fit to these different ways of being curious, and if they overlap. Are there places also where they overlap a lot in terms of their shape?
And you're asking specifically about the busybody, the hunter, and the dancer, or more
Yeah, or just
generally?
in different. I guess I'm trying to understand what would be sort of the farthest ones from one another because these are kind of as you show in the book, it's really about the ways that we're thinking and the ways that we're moving through the world in a sense. When we start to think about like your work of how do things change or how might we find better ways of being curious or also recognizing different forms of curiosity. I just wonder are there places in that space that are farther apart that are less likely to acknowledge one another? Are they all sort of overlapping in similar ways in terms of their topographies?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I mean, I get the question fairly often about how to say this. Folks on the left politically really tend to think of themselves as curious,
Mm,
as interested and willing to take risks and to engage with diversity, adjust their beliefs and patterns and values. Um, and they perceive typically those on the right as being more entrenched and less willing to again, engage with diversity or change values and systems of belief. But I think it's honestly having sort of we both Danny and I have a family that's pretty split down the middle of this particular divide. Um, I think it's important to ask again where how curiosity is showing up in these different communities. So I think I'm going to answer this at a community level. The busybody and the hunter and the dancer are simply locatable on one political spectrum or the other, but rather in each of these sort of worlds, political worlds, they're going to manifest themselves differently, but they'll be there. But they won't necessarily be recognized from outside of that world as
mm,
being busybody like curiosity or hunter like curiosity or dancer like curiosity. Uh, that seems important. And maybe another way I would tackle this is to talk about, I do some work on social movements and specifically social justice movements. And I think the perception of people who don't want that particular group to flourish or to win, whatever is being won, um, tend to see social movement activists, social justice activists as simply hammering down the like, we know what's right and we're not changing our minds and we want to fix it and we're going to fix it this way. To see that the social justice activist as a domineering knowledge holder. Whereas I think if we analyze from within the movement itself, we tend to see a lot of curious behavior. So, like, what really is the problem we're trying to figure out, and who should be leading this movement? How is it that we're going to fix the thing that we want to fix? So, the perceptions, again, of who is curious and how are really different based on social position or which kind of hubs you're sitting in within the network, the
mm,
social network of ideas. That's important. And I think it's important to broadly stretch out and not and to resist the temptation to think that knowledge is some kind of universal system that we're all just adding pieces to and that we all are building the same structure. No, knowledge is this complex system with lots of different hubs and nodes and levels, etc., and registers, and some of those don't talk to each other, right? They're
mm.
so stretched out and far apart, and others of them are really resonating or fighting in some way, but there are links and threads that you can trace between them. And I think it would be maybe curiosity as edge work that would help us kind of break down the current polarizations in the network of knowledge structures and allow us to hear and work with one another better.
Excellent. Yes, thank you for you sort of switched the camera angle there because I think I was thinking of curiosity itself as the patterns and the habits but actually, yeah, it's much wider, right? It's almost developmental how we come at knowledge and build patterns and what we think of as knowledge. And it is in many different dimensions. And we may all be curious in similar ways. That might even make us think that we have had similar experiences or share similar experiences now, or yeah, and actually that's not the case really. It's so there's something else where we have to really step back even further and see the larger landscape in a different way. And maybe that gets us to this idea of walking that you talk about. There's different kinds of walks. I wonder if that relates to if you've thought about that in terms of um, development and how what one encounters in one's life leads one to walk in a certain way, for example, at certain times, to walk these kind of landscapes, be they mental or physical experiences.
Yeah. Yes. I'm obsessed with walking. So
Okay, yeah,
if I
yeah, me
could
too.
write if I could write another book on walking, I would. Uh, so I do think about this a lot about the how we develop our walks. When I'm actually talking about physical walks. So I do think that
Mm,
each of us develops how it is that we physically walk in a world,
mhm,
not just where we walk and when we walk and how long we walk, et cetera, but also just the how the walk sits in our body.
mhm.
Uh,
The
we
poise, the
develop,
gait. I think you
yeah,
talk about that. Mm,
yeah, exactly, and that's important for all kinds of reasons because I think there are ways of signaling belonging through our walks or signaling otherness or foreignness or difference in our walks that can like create community and or create rifts or acts of violence, right? So I do work in LGBT studies and this is one of the uh one topic that comes up fairly regularly there. But then how we walk in conceptual spaces is also very socially inherited in a lot of different ways. So the path that I will take to answer a question that you asked me today will have a lot to do with how I've been trained. And what kind of patterns of thinking I've been most familiar with. And that so yeah, we're walking all the time when we're talking
mhm,
to each other as much as when we're striding, across a field. Um,
mhm. Yeah, I love
and
that
that
you
that
connect
means
it to
yeah,
that. Mhm,
just yeah, that I think as you know, I think and are aware and care about, this has to have multiple disciplines involved in kind of thinking it through.
yeah, absolutely. I always think of walking literally as cognitive and in this way of how we learn how to do it and also how we hold ourselves and how we assume that others think it is or is not proper and so on and so on. There's so much there, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is so we're talking about physical space, physical walking, and how this is also a way to understand how we walk through um, languages and ideas and our kind of collection of knowledge, what we think we know. And we're also talking about how those are can be very, very different from those around us. So I guess I'm wondering in your work how you've noticed that people recognize that there are other ways of walking and other ways of thinking, and if you've noticed any patterns or habits that are helpful for just becoming more aware that there are many different ways to walk in the spaces that we share.
This makes me think of the word method, which refers to being on the path of something, and and I think that oftentimes with methods in various fields of inquiry. This is how you do it. There's just one way to do it. And so we don't really think about it as kinds of walks, but rather this is how you get from there here to there.
Mhm.
You ask the question, you answer it this way, the end. Um, so it doesn't even feel like a walk. Uh, but in fact it is. It is a method is a
Mhm.
and it's important consistently, I think, for us to return to the fact that methods are always under um, up for debate, right? And under critique. And there's a constant push and tug to try to say, well, the method or the path should move. We should be asking questions in this way, or we should be asking questions in that way, or pursuing our knowledge this way or that way. How we ask our questions and where we gather our information and how we organize that information and then how we share and disperse it. There's there's many ways, and each way has something not on disciplinarily at stake, but also certainly socially at stake. Um, and so I think one of the things I think about from your question is not just a kind of everyday way in which people may not appreciate how many different walks there are in our everyday lives, but also academically, I think that disciplines continue to be really put out by the multiplicity of walks there actually are. And there's a constant trying to like, come on, come on, come on, let's rein these in and let's do it the right way. And let's do
Mhm.
it in a way that's traditionally sort of more traditionally expected or more recently established, whatever the thing is. Uh, and I think it limits how we get to ask our questions and then what we get to see when we're taking those walks.
Mhm. Exactly. And you bring up a lot of great examples of people who wanted to take walks that were interdisciplinary in this way, or just seemed like kind of crazy by asking certain questions of the research that they wanted to do, or whatever that other people thought that you can't possibly do that, or you have to rein yourself in and choose one subject, or there's many examples you give in the book. But those ways do, if one persists, I mean, with this pioneer idea or persistence, those ways of walking do can become their own paths and sets for other people to follow and to come on. I mean, not that you can have exactly the answer to this, but why so many of us do feel kind of threatened by new forms of walking and new paths, when at the same time we also seem to hold those up too at some point as knowing that they're the change makers, the things that have changed the world in a positive way. I imagine you've had to deal with this tension a lot, and with trying to sort of figure out where is the point where one can just be aware and attentive and kind of open the space to new paths without being reactionary, or if the reactionary part is necessary. I don't know. Any thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
that's a tough one. I think about I often tell this story of the first time I floated the idea of writing a dissertation on curiosity, and one of my advisors saying, "No one's written a book on curiosity, so you can't." And that still sticks with me that
Wow.
that
Mhm.
there is no book on curiosity yet in philosophy, so therefore you can't write one because there isn't one yet because there's nothing to like
Seems
do.
the opposite should be true. It's
And it
very,
seems the
yeah.
opposite should be true. Like, great, there
Mhm.
isn't one yet. Go do it. But I think
Exactly.
in microcosm, this is some related to what you're talking about here. Um, I wonder, and this is not my field, right? A more psychotherapeutic, social psychotherapy question. But maybe it could also be a neuroscience question. Um, we need to save energy, intellectual energy, where we can. There's just too much to process and too much to work through, and, to actually take every single question and every new pathway just as seriously as the next, right? We would never move. And so I think that in some way, that instinct to kind of pare down all the possibilities into some manageable frame of a few is one of the reasons that people do restrict, I think, new disciplinary paths. There's just that's going to be too energy intensive, and who knows if it's going to pay off, and it's just
Mhm.
distracting from the thing we know works. So let's just keep doing this. So I do think there's some probably basic neural basis for this instinct, and yet it's obviously a perennial challenge. I mean, if we think
Mhm.
about the history of philosophy, if we think about the history of science, it's just people have to constantly say, "No, I really think this is the new question. This is the new path, and we're gonna do it." And sometimes it gets taken up and completely changes the field, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it pitters out, and that's the end, and that person's not super remembered.
Mhm.
And that's just a part of the story of fields and social life.
Though all those paths are usually parts of bigger paths, even when they're sort of dead ends, I think they open new ways, perhaps even in subjects or questions or fields they didn't mean to.
I
But
love that.
mm,
I love that. I would love to hear more about dead ends. Like,
well, I would,
speaking of like
mm,
walking paths of thought and dead ends. That's
yeah, because I was talking to someone about for about motoring, how we're changing to electric, and the scholar said, yeah, well, some people will spend their whole lives trying something new and it's a dead end. And I mean, maybe it's the idealistic part of me that thinks, no, there's no dead end. But I just in terms of even complexity or science or something, you can't really explore without opening new paths for other people. It's just that it might not be what you had in mind for yourself that you wanted to achieve or something. So I've been thinking about that in terms of like branching and how where you depending on where you move the measuring point, the vantage point, how those kind of paths realign. It's interesting.
yeah, that's fascinating. I love it.
It reminds me of your idea of this being connected rather than acquisitional, which I think is just a wonderful way to think about curiosity too, because there's something about the idea of a dead end even or not getting what you want or I don't know, it also feels binary to me and like stuck in one either or mindset. Rather like we have to get all the information and we have to somehow do what we said we were going to do. I don't know. There's something about it that feels very the power of it is different. It's turned in a different direction than I think this kind of curiosity that you explain in the book or demonstrate this practice which is more about getting out of that uh, space in a way and I don't know, opening it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, so a connectional theory of curiosity would not really allow for moments of failure or dead ends, but would always grant that that new connections have been laid, and whether those connections are useful now or useful 300 years from now or never useful isn't really the point. It's more of the making of the connections and being part of this process of growth, really.
Exactly, and also for me, it calls into question this notion of I and the way we define ourselves and um, in that larger space and being able to dance and maybe understand that self is not what you thought it was. That opens up if you can sit with that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's so funny, I do write about dancing in the mind, and
Hmm.
but I'm not a dancer in my body. But I do think there's something really wonderful about thinking about the dance of ideas and being a part of it.
Hmm. Or even just, I guess I meant this movement too, where you're not necessarily linear, but still there's a flow or a rhythm, something like this. Which in that case, you're definitely a dancer in the writing.
Right.
I wonder how you think about like how this is connected to other form, like how we. It might be too big of a question, or but if I don't think so, but with your other work, to bring it in a little bit, like how this notion of curiosity helps us think about other political issues, social issues, but also ecological issues, other forms of life and our connection to them and their curiosity, be they other humans or plants or, you know, animals in a way. Is there a way to think about curiosity as not just human, I guess, is what I mean, or not just um, one human individual?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question because, yeah, my critique in general of the traditional theory of curiosity has been that it's acquisitional in nature and that it's individual, really, instead of social. Um, but there should be a third level of that critique, that it's anthropocentric curiosity. It presumes that curiosity is a human capacity and a merely human capacity or an only human capacity. And this is repeatedly stated, and most people who study curiosity would claim that still today, thousands of years ago and today, that curiosity is a human, uh, distinctly human marker or characteristic. But and I honestly think that divide has been incredibly uh, uh has been really heavily involved in the human animal human world relationships that have developed such that we use how many? thousands, millions of animals for our research without
So
thinking
many,
about,
gosh, yeah.
without thinking about their lives and their communities and their ecologies.
And their
Um,
trajectories and
yeah, yeah. And then also
ways
our
of walking.
and their ways of walking,
Mhm.
yeah. And then also our use of the Earth's natural resources, right? Our curiosity to do whatever it is that we want to do with the stuff that is around us instead of thinking about its role, the resources, the Earth's resources role in many other, um, again, livelihoods of multiple beings and futures. So if we had thought from the beginning of curiosity as a more than human capacity, a capacity that we share with other animals like ourselves and unlike ourselves, as well as plants and perhaps even solar systems, right? I mean, universes. One could think of the creativity of a universe as being curious in some way, as expanding and creating and then coming back in. And that might be a model for curiosity itself. So I don't know if we thought about it in this much greater perspective, would we have behaved different? And would we be in a different place with respect to the other beings we share um, this space with? Yes, I think absolutely yes. So I'm very interested. In the book we have a bestiary of curiosity in which we are looking at other creatures as models of curiosity. But I think we could there's so much more to be done here to think curiosity at a more ecological level.
I think it's wonderful in the book how connected you are. The work is to other forms of life. It's very, very connected to plants and animals and so on. It's a part of, every chapter in some way. And it almost made me think in a way that we could be the curiosity of those creatures if you think of it in terms of evolution and, all these many, many different forms of life trying many different paths and so on. Our curiosity about the plant and the animal is in a way its own curiosity.
I love that. Such that our curiosity, I like that because then human curiosity is not the origin of curiosity, but you're suggesting actually human curiosity is the result of um what is it? Other animal and
It's
fungal.
participating in, I think there's a kind of
Yeah.
movement, right? If you really think of it as a practice and a movement in the way that you lay out in the book, and even all the different little animals and
Yeah.
what we've learned about from them and the way you lay it out in the bestiary, there's something already, there's a thread there that was never disconnected. I don't know how to articulate it perfectly yet, but there's a way in which if we could get our stuff together as humans, our curiosity could be a beneficial curiosity for those other creatures too.
Yeah. I love that. That's really great.
Yeah, well, your book made me think of it. So, uh, I really love that at the end of the book, you talk about the future through this idea of cracks. That's like it's like broken and crack and destruction future, but it's also very hopeful and optimistic and uh, also just uh, neutral in a way. But this is wonderful, this idea of cracks. And I just want to think about it a little bit. And I also want to bring up the name of someone who I've never been able to say very well. Maybe you can help me. Gloria
Anzaldua.
Anzald. Say it again. Could you help me?
Anzaldua. Yeah.
Anzaldua. Okay. So this idea that cracks are where the light gets in. I love that you think about the future in that way and the way you present it in the book, and it kind of opens up. You just feel the book sort of branching and letting you sort of fly. How did that come into being? And yeah, just tell me what
Yeah.
you think about Gloria too, if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is there were moments of the book that were more absolutely delightful discoveries or experiments than others. One was the notion of walking and bringing the philosophy of walking together with the network science of walking. That was one of the highlights of writing this book with Danny. And then another was cracks, when we stumbled upon
Okay.
cracks. So it came about because um, we'd written the whole book as curiosity, as this capacity to build connections, and that building connections was the primary thing. But the more we were talking about it, obviously experiencing it and noticing our own curiosities, um, we realized, and even in, network science, there's a degeneration of edges. It's not just that edges get built, but they also degenerate and they become lost or become broken, and then new ones
Mm-hmm.
form. And so we wanted to capture that deconstruction as much as the construction that is emphasized throughout the whole
Mm-hmm.
book. What is it when things break or when things crack? Oh, and that was just it was just too fun because we can talk about cracks in a network sense, we can talk about it in a geographical or geological sense,
Yeah,
and then
archaeological. It's all there.
yeah,
It's yeah,
yeah, and then
cracking
obviously
eggs, insect wings. I mean, like it's amazing.
yeah, yeah, and then obviously the psychology of cracks, or the as you're
Mm-hmm.
pointing out, this the sociology, right? When our the cracks in our perceptual worlds and our social worlds happen, and how does that open something for our futures or for hope? And I am really interested, consistent. I keep trying to write things about curiosity and hope because I do think there's a connection. Maybe I've thought about that more than curiosity and risk, although hope and risk are connected there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, we wanted to think about the destructiveness of curiosity and the breaking of edges, not just the beauty.
And also
And
even further than that, how the destruction itself is creative. I think you show that in that chapter where again to get away from this binary either or and to into this complexity, right? Where yes, we need these words and terms to discuss things, but these are just our tools. And so we need to talk about destruction as being creative and creative as being destructive. Like you sort of open that up in a way that you can't quite articulate. But that's why that chapter also gets a little poetic and you're able to express it.
yeah, it's definitely the most experimental of the
Hmm.
chapters as far as how we structured it and wrote. I don't know. It's got weird interludes about dictionaries, and
It's super
it's
cool. It's yeah, it really works. I mean, it did for me at least, and I think it
I'm so
does for.
glad we had one reviewer say, "Scratch that. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh
Like
no,
it's just
it
confusing the
just
word."
needs time. It's one of those things people, yeah, more and more people will understand. I think once you think about these issues a little bit
Mm,
and you come
yeah,
back to that, then
yeah.
it makes a lot more sense.
Good, good. I'm glad
Yeah.
to hear.
Before we go, because I know you have to go soon. I do want to come back to the beginning in a T.S. Eliot kind of way of the book, and this thing that you actually say of T.S. Eliot. I don't know if you wrote it or Danny wrote it, but it's that of just borrowing poet T.S. Eliot's words of love to frame our pursuit of curiosity. We lift and drop each question on your plate. We take the time for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions. We take the time to wonder, do I dare? And as we do, we find one simple answer. Curiosity does dare. It dares disturb the universe. I love that. And I think it also kind of cracks something open. But why did you say words of love from T.S. Eliot? Hard question, I know, but it struck me as quite a phrase.
Yeah, I think we wanted to acknowledge that the um, poem itself is about a love relationship, and that we're, in a sense, we're taking it out of context. But now that I'm speaking with you on this podcast, maybe it's not. Maybe love and curiosity are not two different contexts.
Maybe if we open
But
to this ecological view, it's a little different.
yeah, maybe. Yeah. So that's what I guess we were trying to flag, that we were borrowing from a different space, from a different nest. This piece of daring to disturb the universe, but again from a different vantage point. Perhaps it's actually the same
Because
space.
it did make me think about this cracking open that we if we come back to the individual level and think about love or experiences, a lot of us do know what that feeling is like, right? And I think maybe that's also an entryway into understanding some of these themes of curiosity. That sort of cracking open too, where you have to kind of look at different paths and different ways forward, and it's a disturbance that can be creative, even though it's of course also destructive.
That is so helpful. I mean, yeah. Now I'm gonna go reprocess all my breakups and my family through the lens
It's
of
helpful.
cracks. And I honestly think that's a great way forward.
Yeah, it helped me, so I thank you. And last thing, the artwork is super cool in the book, and I want everyone to go look at it. Could you just tell me about the artist just for a second?
We have a full page piece in front of every chapter, and those pieces are by Poonam Mistry, who's a UK, and she does primarily children's books, honestly,
Oh.
and her work is really centered on patterns and nature. And because of the role of patterns and nature in the book, we thought this person would be perfect, and thank God she said yes. We
Wow.
ended up sending her something like a 300-page dossier where we just collected Google images of all the things we were thinking about
That would be
throughout
awesome.
the book. And we said,
Mm.
this page, this page, this page, this. So she could just kind of flip through it and see the images that were in our mind when we were writing. And she used that as inspiration to develop the pieces for the chapters, which we absolutely adore.
And just since you said they're mostly for children, and then your dedication is to all the children who question whether it needs to be this way. This is really great too. And I wonder if like where that came from, or if that was just, I don't know, maybe where did that dedication come from? Last question.
Yeah. We I don't know. We felt that we were these children who asked if it had to be this way. There were a lot of mundane but also painful ways in which we were expected to live and to think, and we uh found that our curiosity couldn't be contained by that. And in a real way, I think our parents were also rebels, and in a sense, and I think they modeled for us that capacity, even though they didn't want us to be the rebels in the way that they were. But I think we are. And we just thought, what, it's important, as all of us adults are talking about whatever we're talking about, to remember children, and to remember the ways in which their curiosity is kind of lifted up as the model. They're the ones who are the most curious, and that's where curiosity is the most alive. And yet, the position of a child is one that's not very empowered. They often don't get to pursue the things they're very interested in, and they often don't get taken seriously in their questions or in their perspectives or in their interests. And I just think, paying attention to that difference and to that location of childhood, and their ability to see through stuff that we've become really acculturated to, habitual about, is so important. So we wanted to highlight that in the dedication.
Well, I'm glad you did. It really resonates also with all these trajectories that we're born into, and that we follow until we recognize maybe we can make our own. And I think that speaks a lot to this cracking, because that definitely happens when you're a child too, right? And also the creation and destruction of it. So it's a beautiful way to begin the book. And thank you for writing the book, and thank you for the work you do. And I wish you all the best with it.
Yeah, thank you for reading it. Thanks for chatting with me. This has been absolutely delightful.
It has been. So thank you so much, Perry. Have a great day there.
Yeah, you too.